Hi there. Welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast with Lisa Schlossberg. I'm your host, Lisa Schlossberg, a licensed social worker, certified health coach, personal trainer, and yoga instructor. If you, like I have, struggle with your relationship with food, eating, and body image, I am here with this podcast to guide you into healing the relationship you have with yourself through a trauma-informed, holistic, and mind-body-soul approach. Together, we can support you in building a lifestyle of more peace, freedom, safety, and power. Hello, and welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast. This is me, Lisa Schlossberg, your host, and we are back today for episode 35 of the solo series. So, as always, I have so much to say. I don't know where this will go exactly. I have some intentions and some flexibility, and we are continuing the conversation. So, again, I do want to just dive in because I really have no announcements or anything for you. And the first thing I'm going to do is share, again, just a little bit of like what's going on behind the scenes, how I find you today, my own personal check-in. Then I have some follow-up thoughts, and then we'll go from there. So, buckle up, as usual. All right, so the first thing on my mind in real time is, I know we've talked about this, like I mentioned something about this very early on in the solo series when I started recording for video, stepping out of my comfort zone in that sense. And I thought it was cool and interesting that I didn't get done up for it. Like I wasn't putting makeup on or, anything. Most of these episodes happen in the sweet spot when I have returned from the gym and before my shower. So I'm, because that's where I very often feel the most connected to the energy and the flow and the ideas and creation. And so anyway, I've gotten in the habit of that and comfortable with that. But the reason I'm bringing it back up is because today I find you in a situation where, long story short, the details don't matter. But I realized yesterday that I was choosing to leave my whole bag of makeup at my mom's place when I was coming back to my apartment. And at first, I noticed what I'm going to call habitual fear pop up in my head because I think I mentioned earlier, when I was younger, there was a period of time where I literally would not leave the house without makeup on my face, at least eyeliner. And anyway, so I noticed that, oh, damn it, okay, if I make this decision to travel this way, then that means that I won't have my makeup bag back in my apartment. I don't know exactly when I'll get it. And my habitual fear response was like, oh, God, no. What am I going to do? Like the panic. But it was like just for an instant. And that's why I'm calling it habitual. It was old. And this is something that really fascinates me, is it's not about something being true or not. Sometimes it's about something just being old and outdated. And so that reaction is it's not about that being wrong or false. It's just at a certain point in my life, that was very real and true. And now it no longer is. If I'm not responding habitually, my natural reaction, because this is how it goes, right? Your first thought is not yours. Your second thought is yours. That's where you get to come into the conversation consciously. And so I noticed that fear, and then very quickly was like, okay, check in with me now, this version of me that exists today. How do I feel about that? And then I felt my whole body relax and just be like, yeah, I don't care. And so it's another, just these, these little moments are everything, because it was in that I was like able to see myself waking up from what is old and what is no longer where I am, and giving myself permission to say, this is how I feel now, right? And similar to the example I gave last time, you might notice if you're watching on video, the necklace that I was wearing, I'm no longer wearing. And I've just had a lot of these thoughts over the last couple of weeks of like, why? Because I don't feel like it. Because I just don't feel like it anymore. And that is listening to your body. Now, I'm going to share, as I'm saying this, I'm going to share another thought that comes to me about this that I've been receiving this kind of visual. As you may know at this point, I think that there are certain movies, but this is how art works. We can express ourselves through art and creation. And so, anyway, all that to say, I get visuals sometimes of, in particular, movies. I've shared many from Harry Potter already that, resonate with me and how I understand this work. But another one that keeps coming up for me where I am in my life with a lot of this stuff is that idea of, I just don't really feel like it anymore. And I'm picturing in my mind as I say this, the scene in Forrest Gump. Okay, so first of all, if you have not ever seen Forrest Gump, I don't know how that could be possible, but that's your homework assignment. Forrest Gump is like probably my favorite movie, or at least one of. So anyway, I love Forrest Gump. I've seen it 100,000 times. When I go to the Forrest Gump restaurant and they do the trivia, I know all the questions. So fun fact, I love Forrest Gump. But there's that scene in it where if you know, he decides that he wants to run. And he finds out that he's a runner and he enjoys it. And he's just running and running and running and running like day after day. And then he's making his way. I don't remember exactly. I know I just said I know every detail about it, but it's been a while. Like, maybe cross country or something. He's just going and going and going to the point where people are writing about him in the news and covering him on the, radio or it's this whole big story. And then he starts gathering a following. And as he keeps running and running and running, there's more and more people. People want to make him merch and people want to, it's this whole big kind of movement. And and then, and his whole thing, he doesn't necessarily have a reason. He just felt like running. And so he ran. And then this is what I want to tell you about, because this is the visual that I keep having in my own head, is then there's a scene where he slows down and he comes to a stop and he just is done. And then this is why I love it though. This is where the meaning of it in some ways comes to me, is like, then there's all these people following him. And all these people are like, well, what are we supposed to do? And Forrest Gump kind of takes the approach, like we talked about on this podcast, is like, that wasn't his problem. He didn't have to figure that out. He didn't force people to follow him. He wasn't asking for, an audience or a following. That's just what people chose to do. They made him a leader. He wasn't looking for leadership. He just felt like running. And so the power of it to me is having that moment where it's like you're running and running and running, or whatever it might be for you, wearing the necklace every day or doing this thing every day. And then slowing down, allowing yourself, giving yourself permission and freedom to slow down and say, yeah, I just don't feel like it anymore. And there doesn't need to be a reason, and you don't need to make it make sense, and you definitely don't need to answer other people's questions about what they are supposed to do now that your thing is no longer aligned with you. It's just, I just felt like it. And I'm saying this because if, again, your goal, desire, intention is to be more attuned to your body and in a safer, more intuitive relationship with food and eating, this is what it is like, and this is in some ways what it takes, is being willing to continue checking in with yourself rather than, again, kind of imprisoning yourself in an identity of, this is what I do, right? So, okay, now that's my first thought. My actual, I didn't even write that one down on my notepad. This is the first follow-up thought, which I'm now calling kind of like a meta thought, because it's not a follow-up thought necessarily to the previous episode. It is a thought about the creative process of creating these episodes. So we have a meta thought. And what I want to say is, okay, I was thinking this morning, I listened to the previous episode, of course, in my little routine. I'm going through my notes, And I, once again, am having that experience like I shared in the previous episode of like, oh, I'm so jazzed about teaching the Venn diagram, but oh shit, I have to spend, this time on the pie chart. And so I keep having this experience where I feel a sense of frustration, powerlessness, impatience. And I could say a whole thing about this, but I'm noticing now in my own experience around certain things, there's a very important distinction between feeling impatient and feeling eager, right? Some of the time, it's the kind of sense of urgency. I feel really impatient. But also sometimes it's just eager. Like it's more excitement related than anxiety related. It's just, I'm excited to do this thing and I'm eager and I want to get to it already, which is, again, so innocent and pure and welcome. But what I'm saying to you is, as I stay aligned with my values of really giving this what it needs and deserves, like this very kind of complicated, nuanced conversation about safe, sustainable, intentional weight loss, I have all these feelings come up of like, I don't want to have to go back. I don't want to have to, I want to get to what I want to get to. But the reason I'm telling you this is because then when I was at the gym this morning, thinking about how I wanted to put all this together and organize it, create some structure around my thoughts and stuff. And I started feeling these frustrated, powerless feelings. What I realized is that then I had the moment of, it's not my fault. This is not my fault that I think that we have to have this conversation and we need to include all of these things. It's not my fault that the pie chart has to come before the Venn diagram. This is just the way of it. And so I'm saying this to you because if something that you want is intentional weight loss, very often, if you're anything like me anyway, it will likely force you into a confrontation with feelings like powerlessness and frustration and just wanting to be there already and wanting the process to go faster than it goes and all of the things, okay? I feel a lot of that about this solo series. But the point here that I want to make is that I am not blaming myself for that. And this is so important, and I'm sure I'm going to come back to this and say more about it because it really is central to how a lot of this can feel safe and sustainable. Because very often what happens is when you get frustrated and you feel a sense of powerlessness and you want to remedy that by feeling more in control, then it might result in bringing the behaviors to a place where it's getting too extreme, it's going too far, right? If you're frustrated, so that's one way that it can show up, is now the sense of impatience or even the eagerness, is driving. And so that can then change the way you're behaving. Maybe you're eating less and exercising more and taking it, again, too extreme because you just can't sit and be patient. But the other way that it shows up is that it becomes something you make meaning of about yourself. Okay? So again, often if you're feeling frustrated that things aren't happening fast enough, not mindfully, but that's why I'm putting this on your radar because it happens so, again, habitually, it happens so mindlessly and again, innocently, but without our awareness, we have a tendency very often to turn that toward ourselves, that I am not doing enough, right? Okay, if that is the story, you've heard me say this, if that is the story, you're going to find places for that to be reinforced because that's how your brain works. So this is why you have to become aware of it, because if you're frustrated that weight loss isn't happening fast enough, very often what that turns into is I'm not doing it fast enough. And that, my friend, is not the case. Very often, it's not about that. It's just about the fact that you are feeling frustrated. And if you aren't practicing the tender self-compassion of accepting your feelings and emotions to alleviate suffering, if you can't just be with, yes, this is frustrating. Yes, I feel powerless. Yes, I do not have all of the control. And that makes me X, Y, and Z in terms of how you feel. If you're not practicing that and you're not allowing yourself to just say, this is frustrating, you will either turn it into reactive behaviors, or it can turn into your own inner dialogue and blaming and shaming yourself when, once again, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that if you take it too far, your brain thinks you're in a famine. You can't do shit about that. That's not your fault. You just have to work with the system you were given, and that's what's true about it. And so you have to stay, in a, balanced, moderate deficit rather than something that's too extreme. And that can be frustrating. And so I just, again, it's like these little things where it's not different. It's not different. Me creating this solo series, being in a creative process and wanting total, complete control over it while also remaining embodied and, guided spiritually through it. It's the same kind of stuff, whether it's food or anything else. So that is my meta thought for today. Okay, now my other follow-up, but not follow-up, kind of. So it's just, I'm so geeked about it all. Okay, so if you've been listening to this solo series, you know already that there has been I'll call it fun, amusing, entertaining alignment between what I'm talking about here and all sorts of things. I mean, I didn't know anything about the Knicks being in the playoffs until I'm over here giving this love letter to New York. I think things like that are really cute and funny. But particularly this time, it's another one of those times where I'm saying things here, and then I start a new class for my doctorate program. I'm doing the reading. I'm doing my homework. I'm going, having the discussions in my class, and I'm like, it's just, I can't make this up. So that is my next chapter of this episode, is talking to you a little bit about what came up in my classes this week, because in the last episode, or okay, maybe not the actual last episode, but before that, I'm talking to you about how I'm thinking of calories as similar to a budget, right? And how it really is all about the energy with which you do that and the relationship you have with that. It's not necessarily disordered. It's not necessarily anything. It's just, an example. And so my last class was about trauma-informed and trauma-responsive supervision. This class that I'm in I'm trying to remember exactly what they call it, but it's about administration and leadership, trauma-informed leadership and administration. So essentially how to run an organization from a trauma-informed lens. And the same is true with the previous class, is about supervision. And the same is true with all of these, it's trauma-informed basically everything. And so this is now, okay, so get this, right? Now, this is about being an executive in leadership roles. So we could argue fierce self-compassion and how to do it in a way that is trauma-informed. So infused with the tender self-compassion or the tenderness, right? So it's not just about being tender and fierce. Now we're talking about being tenderly fierce, because as we mentioned in the Venn diagram in the previous episode, just to kind of bring it back there, it's not about what you're doing. It's about the energy with which you're doing it. And so if you're having conversations with yourself that are, a little bit too fierce or a little bit too tender, that's going to kind of sway you to either side. But now we're talking about being tenderly fierce. So as I'm doing all of this, I, again, am just like, I can't make this up. The timing of it is just divine. So what I want to do is read you a couple things that came from the readings and the discussion this week, because I want to offer this as another way of thinking about the quote unquote budgeting that you might have to participate in consciously if what you want is safe and sustainable intentional weight loss. Okay, so I'm again reading from my notes. A budget is a leadership tool, not just an accounting document. Good leaders don't simply, quote, balance the books. They allocate resources according to organizational priorities. This isn't about mistrust. It's about accountability. Another thing I love, leadership means stewarding resources. So a big kind of overarching theme of the last week was talking about how budgeting is not about money. Budgeting is a value statement. And I think this is so powerful. Can you imagine me reading this in a textbook this week? It was like, budgeting is a value statement. Because what it means, okay, I'm going to just read from my notes. Why is budgeting an ethical issue? Because every budget reflects priorities. Where money goes reveals the values of the organization, of the agency, of the CEO, whatever it is. What happens if an organization has an incredible mission, but poor financial management? It closes. Mission alone is not enough. Okay? And so this is where I think about how this applies internally with something like intentional weight loss. What happens if you have all the right intention, right? And all the tenderness, but you have no quote unquote financial management? If actually looking at the numbers isn't happening, what happens? It closes, right? You don't go where you want to go. You don't get where you want to get. And it's not about you. It's about the fact that the relationship with this thing is avoidant. And so what happens? It closes. It doesn't work. Okay. A budget is an ethical document because it reflects an organization's values and priorities, not just its finances. Another thing I love about this, you don't need to, these are from my notes, you don't need to become an accountant. You do need to understand income, expenses, assets, liabilities, cash flow, net income and loss, etc. Because, why do you have to know these things? Because executives make decisions from these numbers. This is how we make decisions. This is what informs what we choose or don't choose. So part of the reason that I'm like obsessed with all this is because I think in module 9, maybe 10 of the coaching program, there's a whole slide about becoming the CEO of your life. And that is what this is all about. You are learning how to reparent yourself internally and externally, emotionally around your feelings, the tenderness, and physically around the food, the fierceness. You're learning how to become the parent. And in a lot of ways, what that means is that you're also becoming the CEO. You are the one making the decisions. And I always think about where this actually came from. I think, it was a client of mine years ago where she was talking about, we were having conversations basically about like parts work and, the different parts of her that come up when she's, let's say, in the boardroom making the decisions. And I think about how, so many thoughts just coming in. I think it was Elizabeth Gilbert once who said to someone, they were asking her about the voice in her head and the voice in her head. And she responded with like, voice, singular. I have like an entire boardroom in there. And so I think about that. And so I was talking to my client about the kind of boardroom of different parts, that show up. And what she said was that in the beginning of our work together, I remember being like, what a testimonial. In the beginning of our work together, when she had a kind of new thought, right? A lot of what I was talking about in the last couple of episodes about shifting out of a weight-centric, weight-oriented mindset and lifestyle and moving more into holistic health and seeing herself as, a full pie chart. She said when she started thinking differently and integrating the things that we were going through in the curriculum, she said at first it felt like in the boardroom, the health-oriented voice, it was coming from like an intern where there's all these people in this room, all these parts of her in the room. And the voice that says, let's focus on our holistic health rather than just our weight, those two things are different. It felt like it was coming from an intern where it's like, what do you know? You don't like, you're new here. Sit back down. That's a cute idea, but leave it to the executives in the room. And that's how it felt. And then, as I've said, I don't know what I've said to you before at this point, but what I have said many times is it reminds me similarly of how, self-compassion really works, where if it's very new and unfamiliar, you might notice when you first start practicing it that it feels like a whisper. And the rest of what you hear in your head, if you are really used to self-loathing, that's the voice that has the megaphone. and the kind, nice, loving, warm, gentle things that you might try on saying to yourself are like a whisper. But then as you continue practicing it, those switch over time. And so then it becomes the very loving voice that eventually has the microphone. I mean, yeah, megaphone, okay? And the self-loathing, which I'll call the voice of fear and judgment, now becomes more like a whisper. And so I think about the example that I've given to you before, where it's like that time that I threw my salad dressing in the trash and it went all over, and I was so quick to be mean to myself about it. And then almost, again, just naturally, this is what integration of all this stuff looks like. There was a part of me that was like, no. Compassion, okay? People make mistakes. We can agree that that was kind of a stupid thing to do, but it's fine. We're not being mean about it, okay? So this is how it works, and this is what you can expect. All of this now coming back to when she said in the beginning of our work together, I felt like an intern in the room had those ideas. And toward the end of our work together, her reflection was, now it doesn't feel like an intern. Now it feels like the CEO. Now it feels like I'm in this room with all these parts of myself, and these health-oriented thoughts, this new mindset, this, paradigm shift is now coming from the CEO, where now it feels like, oh, yeah, okay, this is who I trust. This is who I believe. This is the person that's in charge. We are making these decisions. Okay, so all of this, again, you cannot be an effective CEO of your own life if you're not looking at the numbers. But the point is that with all of this, are you looking at the numbers so that you can align your decisions, choices, and behaviors with your values? A budget is a value statement, period. The same exact thing is true for you. And it doesn't mean, again, that you budgeting, quote unquote, your calories for intentional weight loss is a good thing or something you should do or something that makes you a good or better or worthy or lovable person. It doesn't mean anything about that or anything about you. It's just about, again, this is the framework. It's about saying, if you want to go where you want to go, if you have dreams and visions and ideas that you want to manifest into reality, you're going to have to look at some of these things. And that's okay, because now you're learning how to take responsibility and be held accountable and all of those things in a way that feels safe. So I just could not record this episode without sharing some of those things. Okay, now that I've shared that with you, other kind of follow-up type thoughts. Another thing that has been sitting in my notepad, my working notepad with all of my thoughts for months probably at this point, is I wanted to include somewhere, and I'm going to include it here, the conversation about how much of communication is verbal versus not verbal. So verbal communication is, of course, the words that are being said. Other kinds of communication, nonverbal communication, are things like tone, pacing, facial expression, body language, things like that. So this is why maybe you've been in the experience before of, it can be hard sometimes to interpret how a text message, for example, was intended to be read or received, because without the information of things like body language and tone and pacing and things like that, we don't get the full message, really. And so one thing I'm thinking of, like I said last time, like pause the episode, watch Obama kill a fly and come back. There is such a good scene from Key and Peele about this. And I I invite you to go look on YouTube or something. Key and Peele text message conversation is probably all you need to search. Google it. I'm sure it will come up. But it's all about this. How, like one guy is sitting on his phone like, yeah, man, whatever. And then the other guy receives it and he's like, yeah, man, whatever. Like that's, the attitude that I'm getting. And it's this whole exchange back and forth, but it's so relatable. So anyway, we're talking about how a lot of communication is nonverbal. Okay. The reason I'm telling you this here in this context is because this really goes with the idea that it's not about what you're doing, it's about the energy with which you're doing it. And importantly, as we're talking about, being mindful of your inner dialogue and what are you saying to yourself? And now, more importantly, what is the energy with which you are speaking to yourself? So not just what you're saying, the energy with which you are saying it. That's where all of this goes. So for example, the example I always think of when it comes to this is the question, why? And I honestly think that it was at some point in my master's program for social work, one of my professors did say, basically, never say why. Never ask why. Maybe you could ask, what makes you say that or what makes you feel that or something like that. But we can feel when receiving the question, why, like we're being judged, right? Why do you feel that way? Can feel more judgmental than what makes you say that or what makes you feel that or what comes up for you around that or, so it's these little things. But so if you're asking the question, right? So maybe, again, you have to know the rules before you break the rules. Maybe if the quote unquote rule is never ask the question, why, then, there's room and opportunity sometimes when, again, the relationship feels safe and trusting and so non-judgmental. You've already proven yourself to be that kind of essence and environment for someone. It can feel really appropriate to say, why? And sometimes, insert that into conversation in a way that doesn't feel threatening. And so it's the example I think of, because if you are turning towards yourself and saying, why? Like, that's so interesting. I'm really curious to know more about that. What is, tell me more. That can feel really loving because it's coming from a place of curiosity, which, as we've talked about with creativity and compassion, is part of self, capital S, self in IFS, energy, it's compassionate. And at the same time, if you say, why? Why did you do that? Why is that your answer? Why is that your feeling? Why are you feeling that? Why are you, right? Then it carries a very different energy. Okay. Now, I am not telling you anything you don't on some level already know and stuff we have not already talked about. But the reason I'm bringing it back up is because very often in this kind of work, now that you're in a place where, okay, you understand you can be coming from a place of love, coming from a place of fear, you are waking up to your own experience in real time using things like mindful eating and the food log or mindfulness log or whatever it is. When you are in the moment, waking up, you're coming to a salad. What kind of energy are you bringing to it? What's the narrative around it? When you're getting on a cardio machine, what is the energy and the narrative that you're bringing to it? Now you have an opportunity to shift that. If you're coming from a place of fear, again, habitual fear, like, oh, a salad, it's a diet food. This means all sorts of things. If you're in that, you do have the opportunity to wake up to it in the moment and be like, wait, no. So with that being said, you want to pay close attention to the way that you're communicating with yourself non-verbally. Because I think almost like, if you're judging yourself or just perceiving yourself to be strictly, simply, solely a physical being, then you're missing all the stuff going on mentally, emotionally. I think the same is true where if you're only focusing on what you're saying to yourself, but not at all the energy with which you're saying it, you're missing it. And then you don't have the opportunity to shift out of the energy of love into the energy of fear because you're not connected to the energy of it. So when you are speaking to yourself about any of this stuff, the invitation and the practice is to be more aware of how it feels in your body. Okay. So when I say the energy of it, How does it feel emotionally? How does it feel in your body when you are hearing your own voice or that narrative or whatever it is? So in some ways, what I'm saying, when I was thinking about all of this, on the tails of the last episode, I was thinking about how another thing, now that I have language for it, is another thing I would put in the middle of the Venn diagram is masculine energy. Okay, right? Because if you're coming at it from a weight mindset, very often that masculine energy is what we talked about a while ago now, about how that's what's imbalanced, that's what's out of alignment, that's what's kind of in overdrive. But if we're coming from a health mindset of, I'm the executive, I'm the CEO, I need to know the numbers so I can make decisions aligned with my values, we could argue that's coming from a really healthy place. And so it's not, again, about the words. And this is so important because this is where so many people get stuck, where they come in and they're like, well, I am saying X, Y, and Z to myself. And it's like, yeah, but how are you saying it? How are you saying it? Because if it feels like judgment, it's going to feel like judgment. The end. So, some people will say that verbal communication is, I think 7% was the study a while ago, or wherever the research came from, that the verbal communication is about 7% and all the other things are about 93. Someone more recently, just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's like someone more recently is like debunking that or because saying that that's not true. I don't really care about the numbers. None of that stuff really matters to me. The whole point is, if you are communicating with yourself, you want to really take into serious consideration that 93%, even if it's just in theory, because the energy is, and this is where, like I said before, I love this stuff to some degree because you just can't bullshit yourself. You are a closed system of energy. And so if the message is carrying judgment, you're going to feel that, and then it won't be sustainable. That's the whole point. So this is why. Okay, now I'm going to say other things that have been sitting on my notepad about this. The belief that accountability or structure is harsh, right? Things like that. That all accountability, all responsibility, all planning, all intention, all of that is harsh or disordered or whatever, is not by itself harsh necessarily, right? It's more about the, obviously, energy it carries. Okay, so the example that I keep thinking of is the way that I was raised by my dad. And I just laugh because he has so much to do with all of this, is something that would come up very often in just the Schlossberg family. And I would file this under the Schlossberg humor, because especially the men, the Schlossberg men, my dad, his brother, his dad, they have kind of their own, it's a Schlossberg sense of humor. I don't know what else to say. But so one of the things that I grew up hearing was something I think also very New York, which is, what are you, an idiot? Like, what are you, an idiot? And the subcontext, okay, this is why, if we look at that on the surface, and it's like, your father used to call you an idiot, is this emotional abuse and blah, blah, and it's like, okay, no, because that, again, if you're judging on the surface, if you're projecting your own stuff onto that, sure, maybe you could, I could see how you get there. That is like, he's being mean or judgmental or any of those things. But the good news is, I knew as his child, because we were so madly in love. I don't know how else to say it. So deeply connected. I felt so safe with him. It was so clear to me my whole life. He's not saying that from a place of judgment. He's not shaming me. What he's saying, the subtext there, right, is, what are you, an idiot? How did you think this was going to work? Did you think, and again, in this example, and these are things I have said to myself, it's like, what are you, an idiot? You think that, again, they kind of similar to what I was saying in the last episode about, like, you think you're going to go the rest of your whole life being a healthy, conscious, intentional person and never have to think about food? What are you, an idiot? Like, so to me, I know because I can feel. This is the whole thing here. How do you know if it's love or fear? How do you know if it's safe or unsustainable? How do you know? Feel it. Feel in your body what is real and true. And so when I'm talking to my dad and he's like, what are you, a moron? That's not how it goes. I know what he's saying to me is, that's a unrealistic expectation to have. That's not how this works. And that is very loving. That's the whole point. Why is he saying, what are you, an idiot? Because he's aligning me with what is true, what I can expect, how things really work, you know? And the reason I say it's so New York is because as I was talking about New York and California and, you know, all of that, some of you have sent me really funny videos that you've seen also on social media, which I love. But the example of that I think, you know, is what I've seen mentioned is, you know, people in California, this is a generalization again, but people in California, you know, if you blow out a tire or something, or you need to change your tire, people in California will be like, oh, that sucks. Like, I really feel for you and good luck with that. And then just like keep driving. And in New York, what stereotypically might happen is more along the lines of, and this is exactly how I've heard it said, what are you, an idiot? You don't know how to change your own tire? You know, get out of here. Give me the tools. And then a New Yorker will, you know, kind of give you some shit for it and then actually help you change your tire and then be on his way. It's like that. So that's how I grew up. That's how I was raised, is very lovingly, what are you, an idiot? And it's been so tremendously helpful because I swear to you, as we talked about a long time ago, I very strongly believe, and you know, this is attachment theory in illustration, the relationship we have with our parents, caregivers, is the model for what we internalize. And so when I hear myself say, what are you, an idiot? I'm like, oh, right. That's that, you know, and it's just, it feels loving to me. So if calling yourself an idiot or calling yourself a maybe moron feels really hurtful and judgmental, don't do that. Don't do that, okay? I'm not saying take my inner dialogue and make it your own. What I'm saying is examine the energy of your inner dialogue if you want to be able to have the ability to leverage it and shift it to move in the direction you would like to. Okay, now, another just anecdote that popped into my head as I was sitting with all of this is when I was in California, I've talked to you about working with a pediatrician. And I think it was the first time I went out there, maybe I was shadowing the practice, and I was staying with her at her house for a couple weeks, I think. And so I was living with her, I was working with her, and one thing that I thought of when I was putting all this together is maybe it was the first night that I was there at her house. I think I ended up having like a snack or something after she probably went to bed. And when I woke up the next morning, she, and to this day, Dr. Patricia Reba, is one of the sweetest, kindest, most gentle, compassionate human beings that I know, that I have ever known. And I remember the way she approached me the next day and let me know that I must have gone into the freezer overnight, or, you know, at some point after we went to bed, because when she woke up in the morning, she saw that I had left the freezer door open and basically everything in the freezer was melted or soggy or mushy or something, because it was like all night. And I think there was like a big puddle of water, maybe the ice or whatever got on the floor. It was like a whole thing. And I felt so bad about it. But the reason it's coming to me as I'm saying all of this is because what stood out to me is how she delivered this message to me. Because what I'm used to is that something like that might be perceived as like life or death. where it wasn't just like, don't cry over spilled milk growing up. It was like, it felt like a lot of things were reacted to with this kind of really charged, really heightened, like life or death energy. And what I remember about being with Patricia was she just came to me and didn't, attack me. It wasn't an insult. She wasn't blaming and shaming me. It was like, I mean, she's a pediatrician, so she works with children, so she knows how to talk to children. but also, she was, holding me accountable and putting something on my radar in a way that was so tender. And so there was it didn't lead to any sort of conflict. It didn't anything. It was so gentle and kind, the way that she expressed it, because I could tell, I knew on some level, or at least I can say I imagine on some level, that that's quite an inconvenience that your house guest that you are being so generous and gracious, to host, comes over and on night one basically fucks up everything in your freezer. Like, that objectively sucks. And she was the point here, okay? The reason I'm telling you this is because she wasn't coming at me to have that conversation with all of that energy. I don't know what she did to process that. I don't know what she did to cope with that. I don't know what she did to support herself with tending to that. But what I know is that by the time we had a conversation about it, she had regulated the energy around it to actually have a conversation with me that felt on the receiving end tender and respectful and kind. So again, just aligning with this theme of sometimes it's going to be frustrating. Yes, it is. But don't make that about you. Again, I'm using this externalized example of Patricia having a conversation with me. But the whole point, just like I said about my dad, is like, it's not just about that happening outside of me with someone else. It's about it happening inside of me with myself. So allow yourself to be frustrated. Allow yourself to be whatever it is that you might be, anxious. But do it in a way that is not in the conversation with yourself. See those two things as separate. And this is where, when I talk to parents, especially, because what we're here talking about is reparenting, using the relationship you have with food as the mechanism through which you learn how to reparent yourself. When I talk to parents, it's like, it can feel sometimes like you're boxed in to only two options of, like we talked about with going to the doctor, bringing your child to the doctor, where it feels like the only options you have are being like too tender, where it's like, no, forget it, we're not going to the doctor, or too fierce, where it's like, shut up, we're going to the doctor. And so with something like this, let's use that exact metaphor as an example. If you're the parent and it feels like those are your only two options, it can feel as though in order for you to show up with tenderness, in order for you to be respectful and loving, in order for you to show up as a safe presence, that you don't get to be frustrated at the same time. And that's a myth. And we need to be, again, just really clear about this kind of stuff, because when it comes to yourself, you cannot bullshit the system of energy. And so how do we do it then? Well, again, when I'm talking to parents very often, it's like, imagine this. When your child really pisses you off, as we have talked about here, it can be very helpful to pause, take a break, remove yourself. This is your ideal circumstances if you can handle that, if you have access to that. Remove yourself, because you know at a certain point, this comes back to not having total control. You can't control the fact that when your stress is too high and there's, something triggers you and you reach a certain threshold, you no longer have control over your own behaviors. You don't have control over that, okay? You have some control over not getting your stress to that point, but okay. You can't control when you're trying to get your kid to get in the car to go to the doctor. You can't control the fact that sometimes you're going to be pissed off about that. That's fine. What you can control is how you show up and how you parent. And so in order for you to get the kid in the car in a way that maintains connection, which is really about what the tenderness is for, you might have to, again, remove yourself for a moment because you know that you are about to get super activated and blow up on your kid and you are practicing not doing that. Maybe it means you pause and you go outside, for example, and you call your friend and you say something along the lines of like, I want to strangle my child right now. And you vent about it and you talk it out and you move the energy of it. That's the whole point. So that you can take a deep breath and then return to your child in a way that's not going to feel so harmful energetically, emotionally. That's the whole point, is with something like this, with all of this, okay? It's about giving yourself the space to say, I am frustrated. This is what I'm doing with my emotional energy of frustration so that I can come back into a conversation. Now we're talking about with myself where I can be kind and tender. Okay. So again, if we use the example from earlier, it might be that you're in a place where you're like, I'm so frustrated that I am not doing enough. And then you go and you hang out with yourself in that and you realize, wait. No, I'm just frustrated because this is the nature of the process. I'm not doing anything wrong here. And it's like, oh, okay, right. So let me make this not about me and go into that conversation where it's like, I know that this is frustrating. Okay. But I can be with you in a way that is still compassionate and kind. So when you do things like, for example, leave your freezer open all night and all your food goes to shit, can you allow yourself to say, this is hella frustrating and I really wish I didn't do that and I hate the fact that I have to deal with the consequences of it and I can see this was not your fault. People make mistakes. This wasn't intentional. I don't need to attack you. It's okay. Ultimately, all of this comes back to, it is safe. It is safe. You are safe with me. Period. So basically what I'm saying here is, again, the energy, here's what I want you to hear. The energy of the delivery and the intention of the message matter more than the message itself. The energy of the delivery and the intention of the message matter way more than the message itself. And this is, once again, precisely why, in my opinion, safe, sustainable, conscious, intentional weight loss requires you to come back inside your body and actually feel your way through it. Very different than diet culture. Okay, now, this is so not at all where I thought this episode was going to go, but I think, again, it all matters, so we're flowing with it. Another thing that's popping into my head now as I'm saying all this to you is something that I think is so profound, but so subtle, so little. Like, it's hard to even, whatever, I'll just tell you. So I'm thinking of all this because, all right, here's a connection. Let me start with the context. A few years ago, a professor of mine from NYU, who really is now more like a mentor of mine, that I remain in relationship with, I think she is brilliant, and her name is Reggie Matthew, and you can find her online, R-E-J-I, Reggie Matthews, and one of the things that I love about her is that she is so integrative in her approach. So cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, all somatics, IFS, art, expressive, music. There's all kinds of things that she will integrate and incorporate into her approach. And that's part of why I love learning from her. But okay, the reason I'm telling you this is because she, a few years ago, became a decidedly not creative, expressive arts therapist and was running expressive arts groups. And so I joined for a while, a few different cohorts of it, which, is funny because looking back at the time, I remember being like, ugh, it was another thing. It was like yoga. It was like I didn't want to do it. But the only reason I didn't really want to do it was because I wasn't comfortable with it. It was like my ego getting in the way. Like, I'm not good at this. And through that experience of showing up over and over and over again to these expressive, and it's not, again, it's not creative, because you're not doing it for the product. You're doing it for the process. It is expressive arts. It's learning how to express yourself. And so these groups where we would do some drawing, we would do some narrative therapy, we would do some movement therapy, we would do all different kinds. We use music, we use movement, we use, words, and anyway, so they're all different kinds, right? So it's not just processing through the left brain. It's also really activating the right brain and kind of balancing things out. And so, okay, all of that to say, at the end of each call, we would do this thing where, and so much of this, by the way, is like every single time I was doing anything, there was that voice of judgment of like, really? And it helped tremendously. Where like now I'm in a place where I'm so proud to say that I actually have this new technique that I created for journaling. Maybe I'll tell you about soon, but it's so informed by just being in this flow of expression. That's what it is. And sometimes with expression, it doesn't make logical sense. I can't reason my way there, but I'm in touch with different ways of, even if you're watching this, it's like just the more kind of flowy, intuitive, I don't know why, but I feel drawn to this color, or this sound made me feel this, or this, it's just, I don't know, but I'm getting to know myself. So isn't that what all of this is for? Anyway, at the end of each of these calls, it would be me and maybe 4 or 5 other people. I think everyone was a therapist. At the end, what we would do is we would share one thing that we want to give away, or that we want, less of. And all of this is like imagination based, right? And one thing that we want more of. And as the other people in the group, what we would do when someone says that they want to get rid of something or leave something behind, it might be perfectionism. It might be fear of failure. It might be the inner critic. Anything that we want to just, leave behind energetically. And what the other people would do is, if you're watching this on video, you can see me doing this, but like taking it, like physically with the hand movements of like pretending that we are taking it from this person. And as we're saying, the thing we want to leave behind, we're like, showing like giving it away. Oops. Okay. Like giving it away with gesture, because gesturing is part of self-expression. And so here's why I'm saying all of this is because for a long time, I used to have a perception of this kind of practice where if someone said, I want to leave behind perfectionism, and I'm watching myself take it from them. For a long time, my thought around that, or my reaction to it was, well, I don't want it. I don't want your perfectionism. You want to leave this behind. I want to leave it behind too. I don't want this. And I never said anything about it, but that was just my immediate reaction, was like, why am I taking the thing that you want to get rid of? Can't we just say, I support you in getting rid of it or something? But here's what this was like an aha moment to me. I don't remember when, but it was so profound because at a certain point, I realized that there is an in-between. For some reason, I want to say a third party, okay? Where if someone is giving away something, and I help them take the weight of it, I help them take it, the third party exists between them and me. So I had the assumption that if I'm taking something from someone else, that means it's my own. And the aha awakening that I had at one point was, oh, I can support this person in leaving this thing behind, and then I can help them put it on the floor and walk away from it. Who says I'm taking it as my own? No one's saying internalize it. No one's saying you go home with it now. There's a third party, and maybe we can just all leave it. And what we're really doing is supporting one another in leaving it behind, and then no one walks away with it. No one takes it home. And this was mind-blowing to me because it cracked open this framework in so many of my relationships, because that's what we're talking about here. All of this is relational, and really what we're zoning in on is the relationship you have with yourself. So when I think about, the Patricia example, it's like she handed her anger, potentially, I would imagine, she handed her anger to this third party so that she could have a conversation with me that was rooted in a regulated state. And that is what I mean when I say, if you are trying to parent your child and you're getting frustrated, don't try to get rid of the frustration. And also, don't project that frustration onto your child. There's a third party. In this case, there's a third option. The third option, the third party, right, might be the friend that you call to say, I'm so frustrated, I need to get this out so that I can, put my game face back on and get back in there in a way that is regulated, safe, and attuned. And I'm sure we could do an entire episode, an entire solo series likely, about how this shows up in our relationships with other people, okay? But notice these kinds of things, because I think, again, so many of us just have the mindset or the perspective that if I'm taking it from you, it means it's mine. And again, in relationships, especially if you have some codependent tendencies, same. Right? Again, a lot of this is coming from just my own lived experience, clearly, is being able to say, oh, wait. Just because I'm helping someone else solve their problem does not make their problem mine to solve. Those are two completely different things, okay? I can offer support, but I'm not taking responsibility for it. And so it's just another thing to consider in the relationship you have with you as you start to do things like take accountability and be responsible. If there are big feelings and reactions that come up to that, think about that third party space, okay? Because that allows you to navigate with tender fierceness so that it can feel safe and therefore be sustainable. All right, so probably not surprising to anyone, we've made it through an hour, and I have once again reached the tip of the iceberg. So we are going to come back next week and continue all of this. And I don't know, I want to tell you like what's on my mind, but it's like I might listen to this and, all that goes out the window for another couple weeks. But one of the things, because I really am eager to mention it, is this whole conversation about food noise, quote unquote food noise. So I think I'm just going to plant the seed, and I don't know, I'm really curious how things marinate for you over the week, because when it comes to something like food noise, which is the biggest buzzword right now, I want you to think about how all of this shows up. It's not about what you're doing. It's about the energy with which you're doing it. And it's not about what you're saying. It's about the energy with which you're saying it. I want to send you into this next week just thinking about, what does that mean for your relationship with what you might be referring to as food noise? I don't know, but you can sit with that and hang out with it. So that's where I'm going to leave it for now. We're coming back next week and we will continue as always. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being on this journey with me. And the last plug today, but I'll keep reminding you of this, is that the Patreon now has its own solo series. So there's a lot that I have to say to you here on the podcast, but if you want to hear about the education that I am getting in everything I'm teaching you personally, come over to the Patreon and hear more about that. So anyway, have the best week of your whole life. I love you dearly. Please rate, review, subscribe, and share the pod, and I'll see you next week.